The content in today's video is an excerpt or just a small taste of what you will learn in my full botanical drawing course. I've had this course for several years now, but I recently released the update just a couple of months ago. It is packed with full-time drawing exercises, lessons, and tutorials as we go through basically the fundamentals of how to draw realistically. The tools that you would learn in this full course will help you not only to draw botanicals well, but really anything that you're trying to draw. These lessons, these resources are universal. And so I'm excited to finally be able to offer that. I thought it would be fun still to share some of that with you here. And today I'll be sharing some of my favorite tips for drawing texture. Again, this isn't the full extent of just my tips and my techniques for drawing texture, but I do think that it will help you out a lot. Let's dive in. Okay, tip number one for drawing texture is to be consistent. One thing that I see people do a lot is that when they approach a problem or something new that they're not sure how to handle, they adapt a completely different drawing style. So just try and be consistent. Maybe you need to observe what you've already done with your illustration, observe the texture that you are trying to capture, whether it's the center of the flower, whether it's like texture such as bark, or if it's even just like stems that are more textured. Take a moment, step back, observe, think how you can solve the problem, but make sure that it is consistent with what you have already included. So for example, if you're going to go into a lot of detail in the texture aspect of the flower, again, whether it's the center of the flower, whether it's the stem, maybe the leaves have a lot of texture to them, you need to then repeat it elsewhere. So there can be some balance where some things have a lot of texture and some things have less. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it is important to just keep everything nice and consistent. So if you're including every lump and bump in the texture of your stem or in your leaves or the center of your flower or the bark, then you need to include every lump and bump, every little insect chewed area of the rest of your florals. So just keep it consistent. If you're going to go into a lot of detail, you're also going to go into a lot of detail elsewhere. My next tip is to embrace those imperfections. So look for the imperfections that you might see within the flower itself, within the texture element itself. If you do make a mistake, remember that nature is imperfect and just kind of go with it. Now, some mistakes, yes, go ahead and erase those, but just remember you don't have to be perfect with it. You don't have to draw every single little circle, every single little lump and bump. You're going to hear me say that a lot. But one of the best things that you can do is just kind of simplify, find that rhythm, and just remember that imperfection is going to happen, especially with something that is textural. And rather than obsessing over it, why don't you move on and see later if you need to come back and adjust it. The very last tip for today, and this is something we go into a lot more detail with in the actual course, but I did still feel like it was important to talk about it here, is to simplify the texture. Now, again, I told you you're going to hear me say this over and over again. You do not have to illustrate every lump and bump that you see in your actual reference or in the flower that you're trying to illustrate. Sometimes simplifying it will actually help to make the piece more cohesive as a whole. Unless you're shading something in and the hyperrealistic drawing style, or again, if you're shading something in, you don't have to include everything in order to get still that illusion, that feel of the texture before you. The trick to making this look realistic is to be very choosy with where you decide to place your texture. Finding a rhythm so that it kind of naturally comes and goes is a great way to give, again, that illusion, capture the feeling of the texture so that your viewer knows, okay, there is something there that has that, the lumps and the bumps. It has maybe a sharp texture, it has a fuzzy texture, etc. It will still communicate that to the viewer, which is our goal as artists. We're trying to successfully communicate, share our ideas without words. Our minds will automatically kind of fill in that negative space once we have a hint of what should be there. So when in doubt, always simplify a little bit. Try and capture kind of the overall effect that your texture is giving, whether it's lumpy or bumpy, or if it's, again, kind of fuzzy or spiky, a softer texture or a much more rough texture. You'll still want to try and capture that, but you don't have to necessarily do it for the entire extent of your textured area. You can just kind of choose some strategic areas to highlight with that texture. Again, we go into a lot more detail of how to do that in the course. But just by applying these drawing tips and tricks, by practicing these different techniques, you will be able to master the different drawing qualities of texture. If you have a favorite texture drawing tip that you would like to share, I would love to hear about it down below. And if there is a drawing problem that you've been faced with, you've been trying to conquer lately, I would love to hear about it and maybe create a video with a solution for you. And until next time, happy drawing. There are also a lot of different ways that you can type. Whoops, you can totally see my wrapping paper. Oh, look, this one matches my Christmas jammies.